What this hearing comes down to for me is whether the federal government should be keeping children in detention indefinitely while waiting for a judge to review their case. We are talking about the indefinite detention of children. That's frankly not who we are as a country, and it's not what the United States should become. Senator Peters referenced the American Academy of Pediatrics. It strongly opposes long-term detention of children. A March 2017 report from the Academy notes that such detention, and this is a quote, can cause psychological trauma and induce long-term mental health risks for children, close quote. The report goes on to say that detaining children can lead to physical and emotional symptoms such as post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal ideation, behavioral problems, and difficulty functioning in school. I'm going to ask both Mr. Albans and Mr. Perez just to clarify your answer to Senator Peters. Are you aware of that report from the American Academy of Pediatrics? First, Mr. Albans.
If I could just clarify, we don't have indefinite detention.
My question is, are you aware of that report from the American Academy of Pediatrics?
I think I've seen media reports on that report.
Okay. And Mr. Perez.
I am not, Senator. The age of someone else in the agency may be, but I am not.
All right, thank you. We'll make sure that you get copies of it. In addition to the American Academy of Pediatrics, two physicians who work for the Department of Homeland Security came forward in July as whistleblowers. They had both visited detention centers housing children that provided an appalling lack of care, including finding, and this is a quote, an infant with bleed of the brain that went undiagnosed for 5 days. Those same physicians stated publicly that detaining children risks permanent psychological harm, placing children at risk of post-traumatic stress and depression later in life. So again, Mr. Albans, have you seen these statements from these DHS whistleblowers?
I don't believe I have, no.
And Mr. Perez?
I have not, Senator.
Beyond the pediatricians and the whistleblowers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement itself set up an advisory committee of subject matter experts to review family detention. And here's what the agency's own advisory committee found. It said that DHS should, quote, discontinue the general use of family detention, and that in cases where detention was absolutely necessary, families should be detained for, quote, the shortest amount of time possible. Now, given that it is DHS's own findings, I'm going to assume that you guys are familiar with that. Mr. Albans, given these findings from the American Academy of Pediatrics, DHS whistleblowers, and your agency's own advisory committee, why does Immigration and Customs Enforcement continue to support modifying the Florence Agreement to allow for the indefinite detention of children?
Okay, as I previously stated, we do not have indefinite detention. The Supreme Court has ruled on that.
But you are recommending the modification or overruling of the Flores decision, which would allow the indefinite detention of children.
Again, there is no indefinite detention of children. People are detained, and just
Right now there isn't because the Flores
but again, our
agreement.
If you let me answer, please.
Excuse me, but I have limited amount of time here. And what I'm trying to get at is you are all here saying, or three of the four of you are here saying, that you want us to allow the federal government to do something that the Flores Agreement does not currently allow. So I understand your current position. But why are you here recommending a set of changes that would allow the indefinite detention of children?
Okay. What we are doing in this regulation is implementing the process as contemplated by the court in its ruling, which was requiring the licensing of that children could be held in licensed facilities. We have been unable to get state licensure in most places. What we have requested and are proposing underneath this regulation is to establish a federal licensing scheme which will be similar and mirror to what we currently utilize in our standards that would enable us to have the authority to hold these individuals. There's no one is arguing there's not a humanitarian crisis. I think the numbers show it.
Mr.
Humanitarian
Albans,
crisis also.
I have limited time, so I'm going to ask you to stop for a second, because what I'm concerned about is your own agency says that there shouldn't be indefinite or long-term detention of children, that it should be as short as possible. And instead of going towards the remedies that could help us some that Senator McCaskill suggested, some that you've heard from other members of the panel suggested. Instead of going towards those remedies to deal with the immigration surge, you are instead recommending something that experts in child development and welfare ask you not to do in your own people. Now, I want to go on to Mr. Perez.